I found out my life had been stolen from me on a Tuesday afternoon, standing in line at a grocery store, holding a basket of eggs and bread, when my card got declined. Not insufficient funds, declined. Not try again, declined. The cashier looked at me with that practiced, pitying smile cashiers give you when they've seen this 100 times before, and she said, "Ma'am, it says this card is over its limit." I laughed. I actually laughed, because it had to be a mistake. I don't carry debt. I've never carried debt. I built my credit score the slow, boring way, paying every bill on time, never buying anything I couldn't afford, treating my credit report like it was a report card I still needed to bring home to a parent who'd be proud of me. That parent was my mother. And in a way, I was still trying to make her proud, even at 28 years old, even after everything. I stepped out of that line with my cheeks burning, apologizing to the people behind me, and I sat in my car in the parking lot with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I pulled up my credit card app. And there it was, a balance of $4,830 on a card I didn't recognize the transactions on. Concert tickets. A designer handbag. 3 months of a subscription box I'd never heard of. A hotel in another city, on a weekend I remembered clearly, because I had been home that whole weekend, alone, nursing a cold and marathoning old sitcoms. My name was on that account. My social security number. My signature, or something close enough to it that no one had questioned it. I want to take you back, though, before you understand how confused and how betrayed I felt in that parking lot. You need to understand who I was. My name is Reagan. I'm the older of 2 daughters. My sister, Blair, is 2 years younger than me, and for our entire lives, we were raised like 2 very different plants in the same garden, one watered, fed, and given all the sunlight, and the other one just expected to grow anyway, on rainwater and whatever was left over. I don't say that with bitterness. Not back then, anyway. I had made peace with being the responsible one, the one who didn't need help, the one who could take care of herself. That was my role in the family, assigned to me so early I don't even remember accepting it. Blair was the sensitive one, the one who needed protecting, the one whose feelings came first because she felt things more deeply than other people, as my mother always said. I worked 2 jobs through college while Blair had her tuition paid outright. I didn't resent it, or I told myself I didn't. I told myself that's just how families work sometimes. Some kids need more. I was independent. I was strong. I didn't need anyone. But sitting in that parking lot, staring at a stranger's shopping spree charged to my name, something inside me went very quiet and very cold. Because I already had a terrible, sinking feeling about who was behind it. I just didn't want to admit it to myself yet. I called the credit card company first. Robotic hold music. A representative named Carlos who was kind, but useless, because he could only tell me that the account had been open for 4 months, and that I needed to file a fraud dispute, and that in the meantime, my credit score had already dropped nearly 90 points. 90 points. Built over a decade, gone in 4 months. Then I called my mother. I didn't call her to accuse her of anything. I called her because she was my mother, and when something devastating happens, you call your mother. That's just wiring, that's just instinct, even for people like me who'd learned to expect less from her than most daughters expect. I called her crying, telling her someone had stolen my identity, that I didn't know what to do, that I was scared. And my mother, my own mother, went silent on the phone for 3 full seconds. 3 seconds that told me everything before she said a single word. "Reagan," she said slowly, carefully, "the way you talk to someone you're about to disappoint. I need you to not overreact when I tell you this." I remember gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. "Mom. What did you do?" It wasn't even a question anymore. It came out flat, because somewhere underneath the shock, some older, tireder part of me already knew. "It's not what I did," she said. "It's, Blair has been going through a really hard time. You know that. And she needed help, and you already have such good credit, sweetheart, and you weren't using it anyway. You weren't using it anyway." 6 words. I want you to sit with those 6 words for a second, because they are going to come back again and again in this story, because those 6 words became the excuse for everything that followed. Not an apology. Not, I'm sorry. Not, we made a terrible mistake. Just a justification, delivered as if I should understand, as if I should even be a little grateful that my unused credit had finally found a purpose. You weren't using it anyway. As if my name wasn't mine unless I was actively spending it. As if my financial safety was community property, something the family could dip into whenever someone else needed it more. I sat in that parking lot for 45 minutes after that call ended. I didn't cry. That's the strange part. I thought I would cry, but instead I just felt this eerie stillness settle over me, like the calm you feel right before a storm actually breaks, when the air goes still and heavy and you know something enormous is coming. Because in that moment, I understood something I had spent 28 years refusing to understand. My mother had not just allowed this to happen. She had facilitated it. She had likely handed Blair the documents, the information, whatever she needed. And worse, in her mind, she had done nothing wrong at all. But what I didn't know that day, sitting in that parking lot with a stranger's debt attached to my name, was just how far back this went. I didn't know that this wasn't the first time. I didn't know that my sister had been quietly bleeding my identity for months, testing the waters, seeing what she could get away with, emboldened every single time by a mother who called it helping family instead of what it actually was. I didn't know, either, what I was about to become in the months ahead, because the version of me who sat in that parking lot, shaking and confused, was not the version of me who would eventually stand in a courtroom, watching my sister's face go pale as the truth came out for everyone to hear. That woman didn't exist yet. She was still being built, brick by brick, betrayal by betrayal. But she was coming. And nobody in my family saw her coming at all. The days after that phone call blurred together into something I can only describe as damage control mixed with disbelief. I filed the fraud report. I froze my credit with all 3 bureaus. I spent hours on hold with banks, repeating my story to strangers who typed while I talked, their keyboard clicks the only sound telling me someone, somewhere, was actually writing down what had happened to me. Each time I said it out loud, my sister opened this account, my mother knew about it, it sounded more unreal, like I was describing someone else's family, not my own. I kept waiting for my mother to call back. To apologize properly. To say she'd talked to Blair, that Blair was horrified, that they were going to fix this together as a family. That call never came. Instead, 2 days later, I got a text from Blair herself. Mom said you're making a huge deal out of this. I was going to pay it back. I just needed help and didn't want to ask you directly because I knew you'd say no. I read that message probably 15 times. Because there it was, in plain text, she hadn't asked because she knew I'd say no. Not because she thought I'd say yes. Not because she thought it was a small thing between sisters. She knew the answer would be no, and she took it anyway. That's not confusion. That's not desperation. That's a choice. I typed back one word, which accounts. She sent me a list like she was proud of her own honesty for finally admitting it. 3 credit lines. Not 1, 3. A store credit card, a general-purpose credit card, and a buy now pay later account I hadn't even known existed until that text. For months, and she'd been rotating through my identity like it was a spare purse she'd found in a closet. I want to be honest about what happened inside me reading that message, because this is the part of the story where everything shifted. I didn't scream. I didn't cry again. Something in me just closed. Like a door quietly shutting in a room I used to live in. I called my mother one more time, and I recorded the call. I want to be clear about why I did that, not because I'm a vindictive person by nature, but because I already knew, deep down, that my family had a long, practiced history of rewriting events after the fact. Of Blair not remembering it that way. Of my mother suddenly recalling a version of events where I had basically agreed to it, or where it was just a misunderstanding. I had grown up watching the story of every conflict get quietly edited until I was the unreasonable one. Not this time. On that call, my mother said something I will never forget as long as I live. She said, "You've always had it easier than her emotionally, Reagan. This is just one small way things could be a little more even between you two." Easier than her emotionally. I had worked 2 jobs through college while my tuition-paid sister slept until noon. I had built my credit brick by brick while she never had to think about money because it was always handed to her. I had spent years being told I was the strong one, as if strength were a resource that got harvested from me for someone else's benefit, rather than something I'd had to build out of necessity because no one was going to hand me softness. And now, apparently, my years of forced independence had earned me the honor of also funding my sister's spending habits, without my knowledge or consent, because things needed to be more even. I hung up the phone that day and I didn't call my mother again for 6 weeks. That silence was its own kind of earthquake in my family. I had always been the one who kept the peace, who smoothed things over, who called first after every argument because I couldn't stand the tension. This time, I let the silence sit. I let it get heavy. I let them feel, for once, what it was like to not have me quietly absorbing the discomfort so everyone else could stay comfortable. But silence doesn't pay off debt, and it doesn't undo a damaged credit report. So while I wasn't speaking to them, I was building something else entirely. I hired a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Priya who specialized in identity theft cases, and who, when I told her the whole story, didn't flinch, didn't act shocked, just nodded and said, "Family identity theft is more common than people think. And it's still a crime. It doesn't matter that it's your sister." Those words, "it's still a crime," hit me harder than almost anything else in this whole ordeal. Because somewhere in my family's twisted internal logic, blood had become a kind of legal immunity. If you did something wrong to a stranger, it was theft. If you did the same exact thing to your sister, it was just family stuff, something to be worked out quietly at Thanksgiving, something you were supposed to forgive because forgiveness was apparently owed automatically to people who shared your last name. Priya walked me through my options. I could pursue this as a civil matter, suing Blair for the damages, the credit repair costs, the emotional distress. Or I could file a police report, which would open a criminal identity theft investigation, since Blair had used my social security number and forged my signature without authorization, an actual federal crime, not a family disagreement. I sat with that decision for days. I won't pretend it was easy. There is a very specific kind of grief in realizing that pursuing justice against your own sister means you might lose her, and your mother, for good. I loved them. That's the part people don't always understand about family betrayal. You don't stop loving someone just because they hurt you. The love and the anger exist in the same chest, fighting for space, and it is exhausting. But what I didn't know that day, as I sat weighing forgiveness against justice, was that Blair and my mother were, at that very moment, already building their defense, not an apology, not restitution, but a defense. Blair had, according to a cousin who eventually told me everything, been telling relatives that I was overreacting and trying to ruin her life over a misunderstanding. My mother had been telling people that I had always been jealous of Blair, and that this was really about old sibling stuff, not anything Blair had actually done. They weren't preparing to make it right. They were preparing to make me the villain. That's the moment something in me hardened into resolve. Because I realized that if I stayed quiet, if I let this get smoothed over the way every conflict in my family always got smoothed over, I would spend the rest of my life being the person who let it go, while Blair walked away with 3 accounts of debt in my name and a story where she was the misunderstood. I decided I wasn't going to let this become another story rewritten at my expense. So I filed the police report. I remember sitting across from a detective, a tired, patient man named Officer Reyes, laying out bank statements, screenshots, the recorded call, Blair's own text confession in black and white. He looked through everything methodically, and at one point he looked up at me and said, "You documented all of this really well." "I've had practice being disbelieved," I told him. And I meant it more than he probably understood. The investigation moved faster than I expected, mostly because Blair, it turned out, was not nearly as careful as she thought she'd been. The hotel charge from that weekend I remembered, the one from when I was home sick, had her name on the reservation itself, along with mine on the payment. The designer handbag had been shipped to her apartment, not mine. Every piece of evidence she thought was hidden in plain sight inside my name was actually a trail leading directly back to her. When my mother found out I'd filed a police report, she called me screaming, genuinely screaming, in a way I had rarely heard from her before. "You're trying to put your sister in jail? Over money? Over money, Reagan?" And I said something to her then that I had never had the courage to say in 28 years. "It was never about the money, Mom. It's about the fact that you both decided my name, my identity, my entire financial future, was something you were allowed to use without asking me. And when I found out, instead of apologizing, you told me I should be grateful I was finally being useful to this family in a way you approved of." She hung up on me. It was the first time in my life my mother had ever hung up on me, and strangely, it didn't feel like losing something. It felt like finally being heard clearly enough that she had nothing left to say back. The investigation continued. And what I didn't fully understand yet, what I would only discover in the weeks that followed, as Officer Reyes dug deeper into the paper trail, was that this wasn't actually the first time Blair had done something like this. There had been a smaller, quieter incident 2 years earlier, one my mother had personally handled and buried, one where Blair had used my old debit card information for a much smaller amount, and my mother had simply paid it off herself before I ever noticed, treating it like a secret worth keeping rather than a warning worth heeding. My mother hadn't just allowed this one betrayal. She had, in a sense, trained Blair that there would never be real consequences, because she had cleaned up the last mess quietly, and she fully expected to clean up this one the same way, with a phone call, a guilt trip, and the phrase, "You weren't using it anyway." She had no idea that this time, the daughter she'd underestimated her whole life had already stopped waiting to be protected by anyone but herself. I want to be honest about something before I tell you how this ended. I never wanted revenge, in the way people usually mean it. I never wanted to destroy my sister for the sake of destroying her. What I wanted, what I needed, was for the truth to exist somewhere outside of my own memory, somewhere it couldn't be edited, minimized, or quietly rewritten by two people who had spent my whole life deciding what version of reality the family would agree to believe. The truth became undeniable on a Thursday morning in a small courtroom that smelled like old carpet and coffee, 3 months after that grocery store checkout line changed my life. Blair was charged with identity theft and fraud. Because of the dollar amount and the number of accounts involved, prosecutors treated it seriously. This wasn't going to disappear with an apology text and a payment plan. My mother was not charged criminally, since she hadn't opened the accounts herself, but she was named in the civil suit I filed alongside the criminal case, for her role in facilitating and enabling the fraud, providing documents and personal information that helped Blair complete the applications. I watched my mother's face when the judge read that part aloud. For the first time in my entire life, I saw something on her face that wasn't performance, wasn't deflection, wasn't a carefully worded excuse. It was fear. Real fear. Because for the first time, the family's usual tools, guilt, minimization, you're overreacting, didn't work on a judge the way they'd always worked on me. Blair's lawyer tried to paint the picture the family had been building for months, that this was a misunderstanding between sisters, that I was vindictive, that Blair had every intention of paying it back. But intentions don't hold up well against bank statements, hotel reservations under her own name, and a text message where she admitted, in her own words, that she hadn't asked me because she knew I'd say no. When the prosecutor read that text aloud in the courtroom, "I knew you'd say no," I watched several jurors' faces change. Because that sentence stripped away every excuse. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't desperation. It was a calculated decision to take something from someone who would have refused to give it. Blair was found guilty. She received probation, mandatory restitution covering every cent of the debt plus my legal fees and credit repair costs, and a permanent record that would follow her for years. She did not go to prison, and honestly, I never wanted that outcome. I wanted accountability, not annihilation. There's a difference, even if it took me a long time to understand where that line was for me. The civil judgment against my mother required her to pay a portion of the damages as well, a smaller amount, but symbolically it mattered more than any number could. It was the court, formally, on paper, saying, "You were responsible for this too. This was not just Blair's mistake. This was yours." I didn't feel triumphant sitting in that courtroom. I want to be honest about that, because I think revenge stories often promise you a kind of clean, satisfying victory, and real life rarely hands you one. What I felt instead was something quieter, relief, mostly. The relief of not having to carry the whole truth alone anymore. The relief of a system finally agreeing with what I had known the whole time, that what happened to me was real, and it mattered, and I hadn't been overreacting. In the months after the verdict, my relationship with my mother and Blair changed in ways I couldn't have predicted. I didn't cut them off entirely. People always expect these stories to end with a dramatic, permanent severing of ties, but real families are messier than that. What actually happened was quieter. My mother, for the first time in my life, apologized to me without immediately following it with an excuse. It wasn't a perfect apology. It came almost a year later, over coffee, stiff and awkward, but it was real. I should have protected you the way I always protected her. I didn't. I'm sorry. I didn't forgive her that day. I want to be honest about that too, because I think there's a pressure in these stories to wrap everything up with forgiveness like a bow on a gift, and that's not always true to life. I told her I appreciated her saying it, and that I needed time, and that time was going to be measured in actions, not apologies. She accepted that. It was the first time she had ever accepted a boundary from me without arguing about it. Blair and I are not close. We speak occasionally, mostly at family gatherings, mostly surface level. She paid back every cent of the restitution, slowly, over 2 years, and I noticed something in her during that time, a kind of humility that hadn't existed in her before, the humility of someone who had finally faced a consequence that couldn't be smoothed over by someone else. I don't know if we'll ever be close the way sisters are supposed to be in the stories people tell. But I know she never touched my name again. As for me, I rebuilt my credit score from the ground up, the same slow, patient way I built it the first time. It took nearly 2 years to fully recover. But something else rebuilt alongside it, something that mattered more than any number on a report, my sense that I was allowed to matter in my own family. Not as the strong one who absorbed everyone else's needs. Not as the reliable one who existed to be useful when convenient. Just as myself, with a name and an identity that belonged to no one but me. If there's a lesson in all of this, and I've had a long time to think about what it is, it's this: love does not require you to disappear so someone else can be seen. Being the strong one in a family is not a compliment when it's used as an excuse to take you for granted. And the people who are supposed to protect you most fiercely are sometimes the ones who need to be told, clearly and without apology, that your boundaries are not up for a family vote. I used to think that setting boundaries with the people who raised me meant I loved them less. I understand now that it meant I had finally started loving myself enough to require the same respect I had always given so freely to everyone else. My name is mine. My credit is mine. My story is mine. And for the first time in 28 years, nobody gets to use any of it without asking me first.